In Mahayana Buddhism, one of the most popular and important holidays is Bodhi Day. Bodhi Day is celebrating the Buddha's enlightenment when he was Siddhartha Gautama. So Siddhartha Gautama, when he was meditating under what we now call the Bodhi tree or the tree of enlightenment, Bodhi means enlightenment, this was that pivotal point where he was able to become the Buddha. And without that, we would not have Buddhism as we have today. So a very important holiday and celebration for us, practiced by many of the traditions inside Mahayana. Now, in Theravada, you see the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and death or parinirvana are all celebrated on one day, whereas inside Mahayana, typically celebrated as their own individual holidays and celebrations. Now, the reason all this is important is without that enlightenment, Siddhartha Gautama could not have gone to the step where he became the Buddha of our era. And that is why it is so pivotal and so key. But as Western Buddhists, we are very focused on this day because, well, in a Gregorian calendar, it can be celebrated in December. And of course, in December, we always also celebrate Christmas and some other holidays. So it's very much in our forefront of this holiday, but we also have the Buddha's birth and also death, which are celebrated as well as individual holidays. So let's kind of step back for a second, then we'll talk about the holiday and the celebration and what to do. So when we were looking at Siddhartha Gautama, born into a life of luxury, eventually left to become a monk. And he tried all of these different types of practices to be able to become enlightened and awakened. And this went on for years, and he was very skilled about all these techniques, but they didn't really lead to the truth, the Dharma that leads to liberation, as we now talk about in Buddhism. And he realized that they weren't the way. So his very last practice is where he was barely eating anything and very much skin and bones. And this was a key part because as he was trying to wash himself on the river, he was basically going, this isn't really the way. He basically almost got washed away and died, able to make it to the shore. And this is where basically almost going to be dying, a young girl coming by to give an offering of milk rice into the forest, saw him, gave it to him instead, and that replenished his energy. Very, very pivotal. We're seeing gratitude, charity, generosity, loving kindness by that girl, but also Siddhartha Gautama is realizing it's the middle way, what we now talk about in Buddhism, that we need to follow. So not these extremes, not the extremes of pleasure or the extremes of like hurting yourself. Neither of those are healthy and helpful to us on a path of enlightenment. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to make sure that our mind and our focus is on the Dharma, on the path, and that leads to awakening and enlightenment. So if all these holistic practices and how your body is and your mind and all that is very, very important. And he realizes these extremes, that doesn't do it. It's going to be this middle way, this middle path. So he went to go and meditate after that. And this is famously where we see that went on for many days, and he was eventually able to become awakened, enlightened, as we talk about in Buddhism. This was that pivotal point, because if he just would have given up, then he wouldn't have become the Buddha. He wouldn't have become enlightened, but he didn't. He persisted, and he was very focused and determined on that particular point. And he became enlightened, as I mentioned, became the Buddha. This is why we're celebrating this day. It's very important to Buddhists, of course, because if you then become the Buddha, we may not even have the Dharma, the teachings right now. We may have to wait even longer for another person to become a Buddha in our world. So this is, in very much summary, why it's so important to us, because he was able, through his devotion, his determination, his effort, become the Buddha through those 40 plus days that he was meditating. And when he became the Buddha, he did have challenges. There were some people didn't believe him, even including the disciples that he was with prior, when he were basically starving themselves. They were there with him, saw him now kind of replenished from that milk rice and the meditation. So he was eating, didn't look like them. And so basically they were very offended by that. That's where we also see his very first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. That is where they became his very first disciples. And this is where Buddhism starts, right? So without that key point of enlightenment, we wouldn't have it. But what do we do as Buddhists? So again, this is something practiced in the Mahayana branch of Buddhism by many of the traditions. And it's going to depend upon the tradition that you're in, maybe country specific or maybe school specific. But there's many different things we can do as Buddhists, and including some things as Western Buddhists we can do as well. So with many of the different ceremonies and different holidays that we have inside Buddhism, you're going to want to focus more on your practice. So Buddhists take any type of celebration or ceremony as a way to maybe take on the 5 precepts for that day, maybe the 8 precepts. Maybe they are going to be showing more loving kindness or generosity or charity to build up those wholesome morality and conduct parts of the Eightfold Path. Maybe they're going to do meditation, the meditative concentration portion. Maybe they're going to do sutra study, the wisdom portion. They're doing different things on this day because the Buddha, this is what we're celebrating, his enlightenment. We want to get to that point as well. So let's take on some additional things we can do during this day as lay Buddhists that we're not going to be probably enlightened during this day, but we can take those steps just like he did throughout his countless lifetimes to go towards that final step. So the different parts of the Eightfold Path and the practices of your tradition, you can put more emphasis on them on this day. You could also do more fun things, right? You can go ahead and bake maybe cookies that are looking like Bodhi leaves, the tree of enlightenment, the Bodhi tree. So that's this fun thing for kids, right? Maybe you're going to make different cultural specific treats that are going to be great on this particular day, then give it out to others. Maybe you're going to go to the temple and engage in a service or a ceremony. Wonderful. These are all different ways that you can do it. Many Buddhists will also do chanting during this day. They'll do bowing and prostrations towards a statue or image of the Buddha because the Buddha is our teacher. We want to emulate what the Buddha did, and as Siddhartha Gautama, as this day says, he became enlightened. So we are bowing, celebrating, prostrating to the Buddha for this remarkable achievement, for without him, we wouldn't even know about Buddhism. And now we have a path to be on. So we're so thankful to our teacher. We are showing that, but we're also bowing, prostrating, celebrating the Buddha inside us, the Buddha nature inside us. So we all have that innate capability to become enlightened. So as we're doing these practices, we are honing that capability, that Buddha nature inside us, so eventually one day that we are able to become enlightened, or at least progress further down the path. So that's just like one of the different, or a few of the different types of things we can do, but it's all based upon your tradition. As anything, you of course don't want to go to extremes, but for a lot of Buddhists, yes, taking on the 8 precepts, or maybe just even focusing on the 5 precepts is very important during that day. If you can go to a temple, if you can listen, give to the monastics, that's also very important. Maybe the sutra study, maybe the chanting, the meditative concentration, all different things you can do, but you don't have to go to extremes on this day. It should be a day of joy and celebration, showing that we are very thankful to the Buddha. Now, as Western Buddhists, another way you can celebrate this is by probably things you already have in your home. So we very much celebrate a lot in the West Christmas. And you probably have a Christmas tree, probably an artificial Christmas tree, probably have multicolored lights. These are fantastic to use for Bodhi Day. The different multicolored lights are very symbolic inside Mahayana Buddhism, as the many different pathways towards enlightenment, the different Dharma doors. So you can use those. Your Christmas tree can now become a Bodhi tree. So this can be also wrapped around with those multicolored lights for all the different pathways, doors to enlightenment. And you can of course put a Buddha statue under there if you'd like to. So you can definitely use what you have already to celebrate Bodhi Day in many, many different ways. But this is a day of joy and celebration for our teacher, for the founder of Buddhism in our era, Shakyamuni Gautama Buddha, that gave us what we know today, the past we know today, all the different traditions we know today, how they've taken Buddhism and applied it. This is what we're celebrating. So happy Bodhi Day, and I hope you enjoyed this video and found it very helpful.